Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with UofM Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. Today, our guest is Kathleen McBroom, and she's a docent at the Detroit Institute of Arts. She's also a librarian and an educator, and we're so lucky to have her today because she is going to be sharing a wealth of information about the ancient gallery at the DIA for the Middle Eastern Department area. She's going to explain it much better. And I will turn it over to her because she is going to also provide a presentation. And at the end, she will be taking questions. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us and for providing this virtual tour for the Chaldean Cultural Center.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm delighted to be here today. And just a little commercial about the Detroit Institute of Arts. We are recognized as one of the finest art museums in North America. And we have about 66,000 pieces in our collection. And I assure you that we are not going to be covering all of those pieces today. Today, we're going to be looking at some of the major pieces that we have in our ancient Middle Eastern galleries. So give me just a moment here and let me get my PowerPoint set up and we will begin. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to begin with these two small pieces. These are polished celt or tiny little hand axes. And these are the two oldest items that we have in the museum at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And they date back roughly 10,000 years, maybe a little bit more. And they're quite small. The one on the left is about, maybe 1 3/4 inches tall by 2 inches long. And then the one on the right, the triangular shaped one, is just about 1 inch per side, and it's about 1 inch deep. And as I said, these were tiny little hand axes, and these would have been used in everyday life for just about every purpose you can think of, from preparing food to clothing to creating kindling to anything you can think of. But these two little hand axes were probably used for rituals or ceremonies. We think this for a couple of reasons. One, because they have survived in such great condition, but also because of the material they're made out of. They're made of pyroxenite stone. And pyroxenite stone is an especially dense stone. It's got a lot of minerals in it, specifically iron and magnesium. And this would have been kind of a rare rock. It wouldn't have been in great abundance. And so for this reason, because it was recognized as a special material, they would have hand carved these ritualist celts out of them. So again, about 10,000 years old, definitely from the Tigris-Euphrates area, northern modern-day Iraq. Don't really know what people would have used them, but they have survived in very good shape. Here are another example of early technology, just like the axes that would have come from approximately the same area, Sumerian. This is a bowl, and it has been carved out of limestone. And it says it's a bowl with 4 bulls. If we look at it, we can see in relief one of the bulls. And the fact that there are 4 bulls, this is a very small bowl. It's only about 4 inches in diameter. And if we had shots of it where you could turn it from side to side, you could see the 4 different bulls. Probably this would have represented like a temple bull herd. Not that many individual people would have had that many bulls in like one family's possession. And this goes back roughly 5,000, 5,500 years ago. Now take a look at this one carved out of limestone and compare it to this next piece, which is made approximately the same time. And look at how the craftsmanship differs between the two bowls. This too is made out of limestone, the exact same material. It's been carved out of it. But look at the incredible amount of detail that we see on this one. The artist who created this, now I should stop right there. The person who created this would not have been considered an artist at this point in time. The person who created this would have been considered a craftsman, because like in most ancient civilizations, there was no such thing as like art for art's sake. There were no artisans. Every single thing that was made had a utilitarian purpose. So the bowls would have been made to be used. Perhaps they would have been saved and only used in ritualistic or a temple offering, but they definitely would have had a type of a use. And again, when we look at the individual who created this bowl, look at the degree of skill that went into it. First of all, just the planning, to know in advance, to be able to have to kind of like abstractly, spatially create room for the 3 different goats that appear over on the left side. Look at the attention to detail in their horns and in kind of their ruffled pelts coming down below their necks. Then over on the right side, again, we have a lion. I'm assuming he was curving around the bull. He was probably chasing after the goats on the other side. But again, look at all of the attention to detail in the swirl of his mane there, all right? Now, ceramics started in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, pretty much. And the very, very first types of ceramic were simple pitch pots made out of clay, or sometimes they might take wet clay and just slam their fist into it to kind of create a very rude cup. And these would have been the types of cups and bowls that women would have made for use within the homes. Then they would have progressed to the type of kind of coil pots that a lot of kids make in elementary school. It's where you take wet clay and you roll it out into long cylinders and then you wind them up. But about 8,000 BCE, the pottery wheel was invented. And once the wheel was invented, the whole craft industry would have been taken over by men, because it would have been an industry where they would have been able to make bowls like this to sell and to trade. Here's a much more recent example of an Assyrian jar that would have been made on the wheel. And when we look at this, you can see the tiny little base where it was connected to the wheel. And this is a very small container. It's about 14 inches tall. Again, it would have been used. It would have been used probably to store grain or some other dry good. It would have had some kind of a stopper at the top, maybe a hunk of cloth or something would have been wedged in there. But as you look at it, you can see the ridges as it goes up and how it would have been spun and brought up on the wheel. You can also see up near the neck, you can see kind of the swirls before we get the heavy lip at the neck. This would have been made on a wheel. It would have been dried in a kiln. Then it would have been painted in a glaze. And this is a very, very typical design, size, and pattern that dates back from, maybe 3,000 years ago from the Assyrian Empire. Now, once they began to make the trade and the ceramics, the issue of ownership would have come up. Ownership, who owned what? Who was trading or bartering for what? So the whole idea of commerce was beginning. And in order to denote ownership, people used to come up with seals. These would be designs carved into a hard object, like this is chalcedony, it's a mineral. They used quartz, they used agate, they used peridot, they used all sorts of hard stones, sometimes even simply sandstone. And then they would press it into wet clay to leave an impression. And so here we have a very, very small stamp. This is not even an inch high, all right? But you can see, look at the delicate sign there. We see the figure of a priest. He has one hand raised up in supplication. And then there is, they call it a lamp or a long trail of trellis coming down. Might be the tree of life, which was very, very symbolic to these ancient cultures. The tree of life talked about the continuity of life and the strength of the land to support its people. And these designs were absolutely individualistic. Every single person had their own unique design. And it wasn't just a random pleasing design. They always incorporated symbols that were kind of like good luck signs or talismans or blessings or protections, something that would evoke good fortune to come their way. And these designs were very tiny. They would be made with tiny, tiny little tools made out of carved stone tips with tiny little bits of metal, maybe copper or bronze. Here's an example of a very small stone. We're not exactly sure how old this one is, but we guess it came from about the same time period. And you can see over on the right what a modern day impression would look like when we stamped it into some wet clay. So we see the figure in the center, We don't know if this is supposed to be a god or a deity, or perhaps a king or a ruler. But coming down on both sides, again, we see this symbol, and it looks like two giant leaves. Again, the tree of life, the most important element of the societies back then, because the tree of life, they weren't just talking about one tree of life. They were talking about just the ability of a civilization to thrive from generation to generation, to feed generations, to take care of themselves, the bounty of the land, so to speak. Now, these small stamp seals were popular, were popular, but also were these little cylinder seals. And this is Babylonian. This is about from 1700 BCE, and this is made out of agate. And this is a cylinder seal. So it's a small round cylinder seal. This would have been rolled across wet clay. And look at, this is the cylinder as it is preserved today. And here's an example of what it looks like when it is embedded into wet clay. Look at all of the detail. So on the side, we have the goddess. We see her hands raised in supplication. We can see the fringe of her dress as it descends all the way down. And then we see the owner's name inscribed through a series of symbols. Look at how crisp this impression is after 3,000 years. And now think about the size of this cylinder. This cylinder seal is only about 1 5/8 inches, 1.5 inches tall. So think about the skill that went into creating this tiny, tiny little design. Here's another example. This one is even more ornate, and this one is made out of quartz crystal. In this one, we have two goddesses, one facing each way. Of course, they would become together, and again, with the owner's name in there. And this one comes from roughly the same time period. But again, it was thought to bring blessings on the individual, and the people who made these, think about the skill and the attention and the detail that went into this to keep these separate. All right, here we have one that's much, much older. All right, it's a cylinder seal. It's a little bit hard to tell from this photograph, but it is circular, it is round, and this is much, much older. This is almost 5,000 years old, Sumerian population. I wanted to point this one out to you, even though we don't have a modern day impression of it, and it's not that easy to see. But I wanted to point this one out to you because the previous seals we looked at, the two stamp seals and the two other cylinder seals, evoked gods, goddesses, deities, divine intervention. This one devokes everyday life, all right? Invokes everyday life. There's a kneeling woman and there are goats, and she's actually weaving cloth into textile. This is unusual. They're actually acknowledging the human work that went into creating the textile. This is a whole other aesthetic. Instead of appealing to the heavens for good luck and good fortune, here they're actually recognizing human labor that went into something. It's a whole different take on things. And it's just interesting to know that even 5,000 years ago, at least in some areas, human effort was recognized and rewarded. Now, here's one more example I wanted to share with you. This is about, maybe 1 inch high. And as you can see, it has a couple little figures on it. Again, we can't tell if they're human or deities. But I wanted to show you, if you look in the center of this, you can see an indentation. This is the type of cylinder seal that would have been worn like through a thong. It would have been worn on a necklace. So this would have been carried with someone when they went to go trade or they went to the market, and then it could have been easily just taken off and just rolled across wet clay. So as I said, there were a number of cylinder seals, but again, the artistry that went into creating these and the depth of detail are truly notable. And the Detroit Institute of Art owns almost 40 of these that come across from different styles and different stages. But I think I've given you a pretty good representation of most of the major aspects of them. Now, cylinder seals were not the only form of communication. There was also cuneiform. Cuneiform was developed in the ancient Middle East in northern Iraq, and it's widely recognized as the very first form of writing in the world. All right, and it was made, as you can see here, a sharpened reed was used, and it was pressed into wet clay, and it would make these triangular indentations. And all of the signs and symbols used in cuneiform were made up from a series of these little triangular indentations. So here we have a very small fragment. It's about, an inch by an inch and a third. And they know that this is recording the date harvest from about 3,000 years ago, 625 BCE roughly. Okay, and this is a small fragment. But here's an interesting piece. This is actually a piece of wet clay that would have been used to train a scribe. Now, scribes, people who knew how to write cuneiform, were highly, highly prized. They held positions of great prestige in most primitive societies, including the Sumerian society. A lot of times they started their training at age 7. Often they would leave their homes and go to special schools and be trained in this. So it was quite a prized position to be able to write. This we know is a student's tablet for a couple of reasons. First of all, its circular shape and then its size. This is about 3.5 inches in diameter, so it would have been easy to be held in a person's hand. And we can see, if we look over here on this side, we see the same symbol repeated. Obviously, the student was practicing the same sign over and over again. And in this particular instance, it's the word king. So how do we know this? Well, here, this is a sign that comes right from the museum, all right? And so it's reiterating what I just told you. It was nicely curved so that it would sit firmly in the student's hand. But if we look down here, this is the symbol for a man, made out of all the wedge shapes and the straight lines. And this is the symbol for a crown. And so if you're going to make the word king, you simply make the sign for a man and then you place the crown on his head. And as we said, when we look over here, we can see that the student was practicing at least 3 examples of the word king over here. Okay? And we have all sorts of examples of cuneiform that have come down from us. Here's a little bit different example of it. This is a cuneiform tablet. It's a receipt for grain. And as you can see, it was placed within a protective envelope, also made out of sun-dried clay. These were just made out of sun-dried clay. These weren't even baked in a kiln. It was just wet clay that, well, the good thing that it was wet clay was that if someone made a mistake, whether they were a student or a scribe, all they had to do was re-wet it and they could, erase their mistake. But here we see an example of a protective envelope that it would be put in so that it could be carried to the master or the owner to show what sort of transactions had taken place. And cuneiform was read left to right. It was written in kind of horizontal strips, so that we would consider that some of the symbols, like for king, was kind of laying on its side, but they were inscribed, and this is a little bit larger than the previous 2 examples. This is about 4 by 5 inches if you take the entire piece of cuneiform and put it into the envelope. Here is one more example. Here's an Assyrian ziggurat brick. This is about 14 by 11 inches, and this would have been used in construction on the inside of a house. This came from the Assyrian capital city of Kalhu, and this is roughly 3,000 years ago, and it would have faced the inside. And what this seems to express is some kind of a blessing. So we don't really know if this was in a home or in a shop or even in a temple. These kinds of bricks are fairly common, so we think they might have been used on the inside of the house, either to bring blessings on the owner of the house, or perhaps to invoke protection. But anyways, the cuneiform was found throughout the Middle East. Now, here we come to our first lifelike statue, all right? This is a worshiping supplicant. You can see it's a humanoid form. This is Sumerian. It's roughly 4,000 years old. It's about 14 inches tall. It's about 5 inches in diameter. It's very realistic. It's carved out of limestone. We can see there's attention to detail that we don't see in a lot of other ancient societies. The head comes down, but we see the ears have been indicated. There's very strong definition of the neck. Then, of course, it comes down. Look at the very sharp angles of the elbows. This is to draw attention to the hands that are clasped in front of the chest, the details of the fingers and the thumbs and how they're curled up. Again, this is someone who has come to beg for a favor or to ask for protection. And now look at the face. Very distinctive face. The very, very broad eyes that go across the entire head. You can see that. The expressive brows on top. It's kind of like a unibrow that goes all the way over. The prominent nose and the lips. And when this was first made, the eyes would have been filled in. The whites of the eyes would have been portrayed using shells, take them white, and then the irises of the eyes would have been filled in with precious stones. Some have even been found with lapis lazuli, which is a very prominent blue stone that comes from modern day Afghanistan. And the brows would have been filled in with maybe bitumen. Bitumen is kind of a black tarry substance made from soot, or else they might have been painted black. All right. We don't know for sure who or what this figure is. For a while, they found a number of these, and they thought that this might be kind of a cult figure or something, but they have since come around and thought that no, this is supposed to represent a human instead. And as you come down, you can see that it's a male, and he's wearing this kind of fringe tasseled skirt that seems to go down in multiple layers. And when archaeologists first discovered this, they were thrown for a loop. They didn't know if this was actually woven cloth that had been made into a series of kind of looped layers, or if it was supposed to represent kind of a shaggy, natural sheep or ram's, fleece. Well, it turned out that they found a number of statues wearing both styles of clothing. So, that actually both would be accurate. Now, one more thing I should say about this is that, again, we don't know who this is. They have found a number of these statues, and often up on the left shoulder, there'll be some kind of a carving or a symbol or an inscription that would give us an idea of who this person was. This statue obviously does not have any marking, so this could be just about any supplicant. These were often found within temples. And here's an interesting side note. A lot of these were found kind of in rubbish heaps, kind of thrown away, and they weren't necessarily damaged, which has led to speculation that perhaps these were generic pieces that were used in times of supplication if someone needed something. And when a temple became overcrowded, older pieces were simply discarded to make room for new ones. This is the oldest freestanding sculpture that the DIA owns. There's another side fact for you. Here's another representation. This is our Birdman, our Assyrian glazed brick with a Birdman. And this is about 2,000 years old or so. And this is an architectural building block. It's made out of ceramic, but this definitely would have been used in construction. It's about 13 by 13 inches square. It's about 3 inches thick. It's really solid. And as you can see, it has been glazed in a number of different glazes. And even though it's, so 2,600 years old, the glazes still remain vibrant to this day. Now, the symbol that is on this brick, this is the Birdman. If you look at the detail down, you can see the bird legs coming down. You can see the talons at the bottom. Then he has the body of a bird with multicolored feathers. They're layered on each other and they fan out into a plume at the end. I know sometimes when I'm down at the museum and I'm touring this with kids, they insist it's a fish man. But we know for a fact this is a Birdman. Look at his upper body. He has on kind of the robe, and then he has a very elaborate beard and headdress of an Assyrian nobleman. And figures of the Birdman first began appearing on cylinder seals, looked at a little bit before, about 7,000 years ago. So we're not 100% sure of who the Birdman was. In the Assyrian culture, they literally worshipped thousands of gods. They had thousands of gods in their pantheon. But the Birdman seems to be one of the oldest gods, perhaps one of the original gods. But his role is uncertain. Sometimes he is portrayed as like an avenging god that evokes terror. Sometimes he's evoked more as kind of a trickster god, a god who gets in trouble, who does things, he drinks too much, he knocks things over and breaks them. He's brought before the other gods to be judged, and he's always excused and let go. In this aspect, he seems to be more of a joyous god, or a god of good luck. And they think that because of his posture with his arms raised up, they think that he was probably supporting the large image of a sun that would have been on a brick that was stacked on top of this one. So again, this probably would have been a sign of good luck. Now, I want you to take a minute and really look at the craftsmanship of this brick, all right, and see. It has different colored glazes. We can see where the glaze is kind of, unevenly applied a little bit. Excuse me. And we can see how the glaze has been, applied onto it. This is flat. If you were looking at this from the side, you might see a little bit of a raise, but not that much. I'm making a point of this because in a little bit, we're going to be comparing this to another type of architectural tile that came along just a few years after this one. All right. But before we do that, I want to spend some time talking about this incredible eagle-headed winged genie. This is a relief. It comes from the Assyrian civilization. And this would have been made by an incredibly skilled craftsman. Look at the attention to detail. It's carved out of gypsum alabaster, which would have been fairly easy to carve, but still. Look at the individual feathers. Look at the individual, every little frond of the feathers. Look at how it gracefully drapes down over on the left side. Look at how the feathers are layered on top of each other and they build up as it goes off to the top left on an oblique angle. And then how the feathers stand up on the eagle's head. Look at how the design has been mirrored in the draping fringe feathers that kind of cascade all the way down to this being's ankles. And then, of course, we have the face itself, the detailed eye and the beak, with just a little hint of kind of a ceremonial beard there on the neck, which an Assyrian nobleman would have had. Now look at the human aspects. Look at the delineation of the muscles in the arm. Look at the delineation of the muscle in the leg. If you could see this, and this really isn't that large, it's about 3.5 feet tall, and up at the top where it's the widest, it's about 2 feet wide. You would see that it almost comes out 3 inches at some point. This is a deeply carved relief, again, made by a very, very highly skilled craftsman. And this relief was found in the royal palace in Nimrud and up in northern Iraq. And this was a palace that had been built by Ashurnasirpal II, who was a king of Assyria in 800 BCE. What this being is doing, first of all, it's called a genie. Think of it more like as a guardian, all right? It's a mythological creature, obviously, but it obviously evokes great strength, great nobility, and great power. Also notice too how we have kind of this side affect. Person is, looking to the side. Of course, at this point in time, the Assyrians would have been aware of and would have had trade, and they would have had some relations with the Egyptians. And so people have wondered about the, artistic, influences going back there. But what we see here is we see this creature turning, and he is tending to the tree of life, which I have mentioned before. We can't really see the tree of life. It's coming down the right edge. We can see some of the leaves. They're more pronounced down at the bottom. And in the genie's left hand, he's holding a pail or a bucket. And in his right hand, he is plucking a spathe off of the tree of life. A spathe is like the husk. It's the outer covering of a palm leaf flower. All right, it's kind of protective of the male part of the palm leaf. So what's going on here is that this magnificent, brave, fierce creature is taking what he can from the tree of life. It is to, again, respect the tree of life and to show that the strength and the power of the king will be able to protect and nurture his people. This is, very, very definitely the sign of a powerful king. This tableau here, the relief, would have been found on the inner courtyards of the palace. And as magnificent as the carving in, and as much as I've gone on and on about it, at the time this was originally created, the entire relief would have been covered in paint. We found remnants of black, white, red, and blue paint covering this entire relief. Just one more note I like to make about this when I share this with visitors to the museum is that this piece was evacuated from the Middle East during the time of the Ottoman Empire. And there were a number of other ships that were taking artifacts away from the area at that time, but they were fired upon and they were sunk in the Tigris-Euphrates River. And so all of those materials were completely lost. And then, of course, think back to 2015, roughly, and the brutal military campaigns that were taking part. And where this palace stood is an area that was pretty much ravaged by ISIS, and the temple was completely destroyed. Most of the artifacts were destroyed. And so I do like to stress that this is one of the very important roles that museums play in the preservations of objects like this that give us insights into the past. Here is another carved relief. This one is about 100 years younger than the one we just saw. And this was made by a different Assyrian king, King Tiglath-Pileser III. All right. This is a huge relief. All right. This is about 8 feet long by about 4 feet high. This too is carved out of gypsum alabaster. And while the carving is detailed and it shows, attention to detail, this is not at all the same quality of carving that we saw in the previous piece. It's believed perhaps that carvings such of these might have been made by enslaved people because they would have been very tedious carvings, and also because the Assyrian Empire at this point of time was all about acquisitions and increasing the large size of the empire. And it would blend in with what the theme of this relief is, which is the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser receiving homage. Now, the king is the second to the left character over here. And we can tell he's the king because he has this rather elaborate headdress on. That's a crown. The person standing immediately to his left behind him is a servant. We can see them waving some sort of a whisk or a fan, attending the king. The king is holding, if you notice his outstretched arm, he's holding a very large bow. This is not a hunting bow. This is a war bow. This is a weapon of war. And this king was known for being an exceptionally skilled military leader. And on the right side, we see 3 Assyrian noblemen who have come to pay him homage. And we can see that they're wearing swords. You can see they're coming out from their belt lines, going out almost perpendicular. The fact that they're wearing swords in the presence of a king, again, shows us what a militaristic society this was and how warriors and fighting were valued. We can also see the very elaborate beards, whether they were real or sometimes false beards. We can see the elaborate hairdos. The nobleman in the center is clean shaven, which means he would have been a very young man, very young, probably in his early teens, but obviously the son of an esteemed family. And they have come to pay homage to the king. And this particular relief, again, this was another royal palace that had been built again at Nimrud in northern Iraq. And this was designed to be on the interior of courtwood walls to awe visitors who would come to the court. This was kind of a form of PR, kind of a form of showing visitors who came in, reminding them of the power of the king. And again, this king, as I said, was very powerful. His exploits are mentioned in the Christian Old Testament, in the Hebrew Old Bible, and in the Book of Kings 2nd. And I don't know if you've had a chance to notice or not, but down here in the center at the bottom, we have someone down on his hands and knees who is paying homage to the king. And there are some beliefs that this individual is a vanquished enemy. And on another part of a relief that the DIA does not own, there is indeed a person who is kneeling down like that, and the king actually has his head on the person's neck. This, though, is probably an Assyrian soldier, again, bowing down in obedience to the king. The reason we say that it's probably a soldier is because look at this really distinctive Assyrian helmet. See how it's kind of pointed and it goes up? Well, we actually own one of these in the museum. And this is an Assyrian helmet. This dates from roughly 850 BCE. It's made out of bronze, and it is about 8 inches tall and about 7.5 inches in circumference. And when I look at this, all I can think of is, I wonder what they wore underneath to pad it. I hope they wore something. It would have been rather uncomfortable. But this has survived in remarkably good shape, and really kind of gives us additional insights into the past. Here is something else that comes from about that same time period. This is truly unique. This is a ceremonial belt, about 850 BCE. It's made out of bronze and hammered sheet metal. It's about 16 inches in diameter at its widest. The belt itself is 12 inches, almost a foot around. But in order to wear it, you'd have to have a 13.5 inch waist. So it'd be rather small. But this, as I said, was a ceremonial object. This was a sacred object. This would have been worn at very, very special ceremonies and rituals. Perhaps either to celebrate a great military victory or perhaps to be brought out before a military campaign to ask for assistance. As I've said, it's made out of hammered sheet metal and repoussé. Repoussé is an artistic treatment of metal where the design is hammered out from the other side. So instead of etching the design into the metal, it's hammered out from the other side, creating the design. And we can see on this belt that the entire belt is covered. I have a better picture. Here's a better angle, a better picture of the front of the belt that would have been worn right directly on the stomach. And you can see the detail here. And you can see many of the designs that we've already talked about. We have 2 winged characters on either side. We can't quite tell if they're eagle-headed guardians or not, but obviously there's some kind of guardians there with the huge wings. And look, right here between them, we have the tree of life. So again, we have the idea of the guardians supporting the people, protecting them, and bringing them on through generations. Up here, we have another winged creature, not 100% sure what it is. We seem to have a procession of horses, and these seem to be riders on horses riding up around the sides here. This side, it would seem to be more chariots coming up. If you look up here at the very top, we have two winged sphinxes. So as I said, there's all sorts of signs and symbols that were of extreme importance to the Assyrians that have been hammered, remember, through the other side, to make them stand out in relief, and it covers the entire belt. There are also forms of decorations going around but at certain points on the belt, there are also names and messages written in cuneiform. Here we see a couple sides of the belts, so you can get an idea of some of the designs that go all the way around it. On this side here, you can see men in chariots being drawn along by horses, perhaps going into war. Down here again, we see two winged sphinxes, and again, there is the symbol for the tree of life. If you look over on this side, you see a man, a warrior, it looks like with the spear, and I'm assuming that's a lion that he is fighting. So there's all sorts of symbols throughout. There are signs of other gods and goddesses and deities and individuals. And as I said, this would have been an absolutely sacred object that would have been brought out only at the most highly formal occasions, and only worn probably by the most deserving of individuals. Well, now let's move on to Babylon. All right, here is an artist sketching, of course, but here's a description of Babylon that comes from the Christian Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Babylon lies in a vast plain, a vast city in the form of a square, with sides nearly 14 miles long. Think of the size of this, a circuit of 56 miles, completely surrounded by a broad moat of water, which of course would have been the Euphrates River. And here we have two modern day artists' interpretations of what the city of Babylon might have looked like. All right, so here we are, we're looking at Babylon from the south, all right? This would be the Euphrates River here. Oh, that's my curve, okay. And here we see a main entranceway, a main gate going into the city of Babylon. And this would be the Ishtar Gate. Now, Ishtar was, as I've said before, there were hundreds, thousands of gods and goddesses in the Babylonian belief system, but Ishtar was one of the major goddesses. She was the goddess of life and death and war, among other things. So this would be the Ishtar Gate. It was one of 8 gates leading into the city, and as I said, it was the only gate coming directly across the Euphrates River. Probably would have been the gate that most foreign dignitaries and captives and outsiders would have come when they came to visit Babylon. And you can see here the ziggurat, which would have been, of course, the high temple, made up of a series of increasingly high steps going up and up. Over on the right, we see the artist's interpretation of what the actual Ishtar Gate would have looked like. This would have been the entranceway, and if you look here, you can see there are like 2 walls. All right, and this would have been like the interior of the 2 walls. And here we see what looks like a diplomatic procession, or perhaps a returning military hero marching into the city. And the artist has shown it to be bright blue. Well, that's because the Ishtar Gate, which was, it was built by King Nebuchadnezzar. And by the way, King Nebuchadnezzar is usually credited with being the first king who employed the use of decorative tiles on the outside of buildings, not just on the inside, but on the outside of buildings to really awe visitors. And anyway, so he would have commissioned this, and we see here that the gates are bright blue, perhaps lapis lazuli, again, a brilliant color blue that comes from modern day Afghanistan. We can see that the gates have all sorts of small little figures on them. And if you look here, down here along the walkway, you can see that there are figures there as well. Well, the Ishtar Gate, of course, it was excavated in 1902 by a German archaeologist. His name was Dr. Robert Koldewey. And it was found near present-day Halab in northern Iraq. And it was excavated, and then it was shipped, and it was reassembled in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And this is a photograph of what the reconstructed, reimagined Ishtar Gate looks like. And again, when you look, you can see it's made up of all sorts of little bricks. And we have these creatures here. These are bulls, and then what is this creature right here? Well, let's take a closer look at this. That creature is Mushushu. Okay, Mushushu. He's the guardian animal of Marduk, and Marduk was the patron god and the protector of Babylon. And when I'm touring at the museum, and we come up to Mushushu, and this is very impressive. This, tile relief here is about 4.5 feet by 5 feet in size. And I asked people, especially kids, so what is Mushushu? And when I ask this question, I usually get 2 answers. 2 words come up a lot. One is unicorn and the other is dinosaur. And of course, those are both incorrect. So let's look at Mushushu together and try to figure out what we have here. So look at the hind legs. Well, the hind legs come down and they end in some pretty serious talons, perhaps an eagle or another bird of prey. If you look at the shape of the body shape and the front paws come down, those seem to be maybe a lion, but the body seems to be covered in scales. And the scales, they continue up into kind of a long, sinuous, kind of like a snake-like neck, and sure enough, there's a forked tongue of a snake. But then if you look up, it's kind of got this frill, kind of like a lizard or a serpent, and a little frill coming down here. The tail over here ends in, that's a scorpion head. And if we go back over here, right over the eye going up, that appears to be a tusk. So what do we have here? We have a combination of all of the most deadly, ferocious animals that the ancient Babylonians would have known about, which they created a compilation figure, Mushushu, the Mushushu dragon, which would have been a fit protector for the city of Babylon. And the way that Mushushu was made, again, if we were at the museum and you could see him from the side, you could see that he is a relief. He comes out almost 4 inches at some point out of the brick. But each brick would have been pressed out of clay into a mold. The mold would have been baked in an oven. Then it would have been brought out. It would have been glazed in these magnificent colors, which, Mushushu is 4,500 years old, and look at how brilliantly colored he still is today. And then he would have been assembled, okay? And you should understand that, so in this one frieze that we have here, it takes 90 bricks to make up one Mushushu, okay? The bricks themselves are, again, about 13 inches by 13 inches, just like the Birdman was. So we've got 90 bricks to make up one dragon. There are roughly 50,000 colored bricks in the Ishtar Gate and over 2 million bricks altogether that make up the entire installation. I mean, what an incredible feat of art, architecture, and engineering. And our Mushushu is the only, well, there's only 2 Mushushu dragons outside of Germany. One is in Istanbul, and the other one is here in Detroit. This was, I said, excavated in 1930, and the Detroit Institute of Arts bought Mushushu from the Pergamon Museum in 1931. There are a number of bulls and lions. This is Ishtar's royal lion, and that's what we saw lining the gate. There are a number of lions that survive that are around the world, and in fact, there's a lion at the University of Chicago that some people may have visited and seen there. And so again, here we have Mushushu, who would have been one of the repeating designs here on the Ishtar Gate. And over here we have the Lion of Ishtar, and this would have been lining the walkway. And think about if you were visiting Babylon for the first time and you encountered this type of artwork and these ferocious beasts, and how just cowed and awed you would have been by the entire thing. And then finally, I just want to go back and revisit the sophistication of Mashushu and the Ishtar lion compared to the Birdman. And these technologies, these tiles were made less than 500 years apart. And so look at how the ceramic technology just improved and exploded in that amount of time. Granted, the very best artisans and craftsmen in the kingdom would have been brought in to work on the city of Babylon for the king, but progress in the Middle East. And that pretty much concludes my presentation for today. As I've said, we have about 66,000 items that the Detroit Institute of Arts owns. At any given time, there's about 6,500 on display. I have given you a very small taste of some of the objects that are available on view down in our ancient Middle Eastern galleries. So I hope that everyone will get the chance in the very near future to come down and visit us. We are open, we are observing all sorts of safety protocols, and if you do want to come down, I advise that you make reservations. Simply go to the Detroit Institute of Arts website, dia.org. You can choose your time and come on down and share all these wonderful, wonderful artifacts that we have to share with you. So that completes my presentation for today. And if there are any questions at this point, I'd be happy to take a look.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was wonderful. I learned so much in this presentation. And I actually have some questions here that I can read off for you. The first question is, was the wheel initially made for pottery and later developed for chariots and used for travel?
I don't know for sure. I honestly don't know. I know that the 8,000 was when the wheel was hand spun, and by about 6,000 BCE, they had figured out a way of like foot pedaling to make it go. So to turn that into a mode of larger transportation for ox carts and chariots, I really don't know.
It was interesting because this is the first time that I heard about the wheel. The wheel was always like as a way of travel, but then that they used it for pottery. So I thought, well, seems like it's the other way around, that it might have been built for the pottery first. The objects that you showed in the presentation housed at the DIA.
Yes, they're all on display. And as I said, I only gave you a small sample. For instance, we have a very large display case that probably has 12 or 14 cylinder seals in it. And the DIA Ancient Middle Eastern Galleries were completely refurbished in 2015. And they're laid out pretty much kind of technology by technology. So like all of the cuneiform artifacts are together, and all of the cylinders are together. And great attention has been made to guarantee that they're all authentic and to identify exactly where they came from. Some of these items were gifts to the DIA maybe 100 years ago. And so our curators spend a great deal of time authenticating their provenance and where they came from. And of course, now they have all sorts of ways to date them more accurately. And so they're constantly rearranging the collection to make sure that they reflect the newest breakthroughs in scholarship and create the best possible overall presentations possible.
Okay, thank you. And did the statues of the men and women dress in the same way?
Well, women representations are very, very few and far between. Goddesses were generally draped in long gowns, all right? I assume they're talking about the freestanding sculpture we have of the supplicant, the man with his arms like this.
Right. So it's the difference that he was just dressed like more of in a skirt, whereas the woman was fully dressed. Was that the main?
We don't have that many representations of women. The ones that we do have, though, they are pretty much veiled, head to foot. Okay. Don't know if the veil was just practical, to keep dust out of the hair. They don't seem to cover the face at this point in time. But yes, both men and women did wear the long skirts. We just don't have the representations of women in sculpture are extraordinarily rare.
Okay. Does the mermaid legend appear first in Mesopotamia, given that the fishman well, somebody says that they read that the fishman was also called Merman, and that the name for the mermaid figure was fishwoman.
Mhm. I think a lot of ancient cultures had mer people, all right? They had peoples who came, I mean, this is just me. I've read things that they think manatees and some other, lonely sailors would mistake dolphins or something for human forms. But merman, mermaid, I don't really know because we don't really have a fishman. We had the Birdman, and kids think he looks like, I mean, our kids automatically assume he's some kind of fish man, But no, I don't know about the merman or mermaids in Assyrian or Sumerian cultures.
Okay. And then given the winged figures, carvings, and the highly sophisticated developed structures in Sumer and other parts of Mesopotamia, some historians claim that Sumerians believed in extraterrestrial. Have you heard anything about that, and what are your views on that?
Again, many ancient cultures thought that birds were sacred creatures because birds could go from, human-bound earth up to the heavens, whether they were going up to the heavens to be with the gods and the goddesses or the ancestors. And birds were revered because it was thought that they could act as emissaries and they could carry messages back and forth. And so if you're trying to show that you were a mighty empire, you would choose an eagle or a magnificent bird, and you would incorporate the power of them to be very, very worthy and powerful emissaries who could act on your behalf. So I think it's a bit of a leap to think that they actually thought that humans or extraterrestrials might be able to fly back and forth. I think it was just more of their belief system that they needed as much help as they could. They wanted strong, mighty entities who could take their entreaties up, and go up and reach the people, the gods, the goddesses, people who had gone before them. That is my personal take on it. And I'm comparing this, I'm thinking to ancient African societies. I'm thinking to ancient American societies, from South America. And I'm thinking about some belief systems that come from Asia. When you look, birds are pretty much universally celebrated, and bird feathers, are thought to have special qualities and things. So that's my answer.
So more like the relationship maybe with nature and with the animals.
And just the ability to fly, the ability to take entreaties up.
So we only have a minute left, and I would like you to share, for people that want to visit the museum, I know hours are different nowadays. How can they go about contacting the museum? Is it based on reservation, or how does it work?
Well, we are open Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 10 a.m. until 4 a.m. And then 9 to 4 on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. And then on the weekends, we're open from 10 until 5. And we do limit the number of people who can come in per hour. And these are based on the governor's guidelines and, the rates of COVID infection and things. So you can go online, dia.org, and there's a great big sign that pops right up about if you want to visit. And if you go there, a calendar pops up and you can pick the time and the date of your visit. And when you come in, they take all sorts of care. They take your temperature when you arrive. They've got the whole museum. We've got it set up now so that it's one-way traffic throughout the museum. And they're taking great care to keep the common areas clean. We're currently not offering any food service, but very soon we hope to introduce some food trucks down there. So if people get hungry or thirsty, they'll have access to food. And the most important question I get, yes, the gift shop is open. So we do want you to come down. We have wonderful special exhibitions going down there, in addition to the ancient Middle Eastern galleries. Currently, we have a special exhibition on Motor City Drive, which is all about car design from 1950 to 2000. And they managed to get 3 whole cars up onto the 2nd floor of the museum. That itself is a pretty important feat. We've got another wonderful exhibition of photographs, Detroit style again, black and white photographs, color photographs. That is the history of Detroit from about the same period, 1940 to 1990. And then of course we have our standing collection, which changes all the time. So it's a fun place to come, it's a safe place to come, and I hope everybody can get down there really soon to visit us.
Well, I'm due to come again to the museum. The last time I came to the DIA was I'm a member of Wisdom, and we all met there right before the COVID. So luckily but now I'm due to come back again, and I'm going to come back with my family. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And we'd love for you to revisit us and go through one of our other galleries, and kind of one that's designed around what the DIA offers too. So we'd be very happy if you can do that for us in the future.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you everybody for watching. Bye-bye.